and a very generous response from
very generous
the Kickstarter comics community, and we'll get into that community in a minute. But $250,000 over $250,000,
yeah,
over the course of what, 10 years or so, 8 years or so?
Less than that. Yeah.
Kickstarter hasn't been around that long. On X number of projects, but talk about that for a minute, because there's only a handful of folks that aren't quote unquote mainstream comic folks, people who are writing regularly for Marvel or DC or Image, people who have that kind of name recognition, that have earned those kinds of dollars over that short period of time on Kickstarter. And we'll talk about the community and why that is, but talk about that for a second. What does that speak to for you? Like, when you look at that number, what does that say? And I'm kind of setting you up because I think I know the answer already, but what does that say to you about Dirk Manning, about who Dirk Manning chooses to be partners with, all of those things? What does that say about your work?
I'm going to deflect for a moment and say that my first Kickstarter, I'm trying to see when it launched, and I thought the date was right on here, and I'm failing miserably in my attempts to deflect the question. Oh gosh, but yeah, it's not been that long. It means that I have very generous backers who support my stuff, and I'm very, 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 very fortunate that they do.
Let me step in then. If you're going to deflect this way, this is what it says to me, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I'm being a bad guest. I'm being a bad guest. No,
not at all. No, you're not. You're being humble, which is very unlike you.
Supposedly. Right. No, it's very unlike the persona.
Thank you very much. And we'll get to that as well. So what it says to me is that not only does Dirk Manning execute on what he says he's going to execute on, because this is a very fickle community. If you don't give them what they're asking for, or what you tell them you're going to give them when you're going to give it to them, then they will turn on you quickly. But it also tells me that you are consistent. You create quality product every single time, or else people wouldn't continue to come back. Now, I know a little bit about the Kickstarter comic community because I worked for a company that decided to use it to publish books, which if there are any potential comic book publishers out there that aren't individuals, and they're thinking, you know what, I think Kickstarter would be a great place to use to sell comic books, you're a jerk, figure it out. But no, yeah.
I know I popped you earlier. I was laughing about it. You got me back. All right, go ahead. Sorry. Yes.
But no, it's this community of fans. There's a certain amount of them that every time anything is released on Kickstarter, on the comic section, they will buy it. There's maybe 300 or 400 folks, maybe 200 that do that. But the more hardcore, they're very discerning. So I guess let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about how you have, at a lot of shows, a lot of conventions, you will put on your Kickstarter 101 panel. So let's do a mini version of that here.
Okay.
Why is Dirk Manning so successful on Kickstarter?
And it was October 2013, by the way, was my first one. So I did find it. In simplest terms with crowdfunding, I always tell people the first thing I know about crowdfunding, whether it be Kickstarter or whatever platform you choose to use, is in order to crowdfund, you have to have a crowd. And sometimes people think I'm talking down to them when I say that. And I'm not. You have to have a crowd if you want to crowdfund. And I know we're going to talk about community building in a little bit here, but it's very crucial that you have a crowd and then that you can activate your crowd. When I published Nightmare World as an online series, starting in the early 2000s, I grew a very substantial crowd. But then the question becomes, can you activate those people? In several capacities do you work? Just because you put stuff online doesn't mean you can get people to pay for it.
Amen, sir.
You have to activate that, and there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's a lot of strategies, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. Kickstarter is, I think, very unique in the sense that, and you just a moment ago talked about how I was being so humble, and now I'm going to just totally blow that out of the water again. And sadly, not even in my Dirking it up, Dirk Manning mode. I was one of the people who I think helped pave the path for how to do successful Kickstarters for comics. And if someone wants to write an angry letter or get a hold of me through my website or social media or whatever and say I'm full of crap, then I'll gladly have that conversation with you. But just like I was on the ground floor of online comics, I was pretty early in the game in regards to how to format a Kickstarter in order to generate excitement. And it's a very simple business concept that you can apply to this: under promise, over deliver.
Sales 101, baby.
It's not complicated. It's really not. So one of the things that I realized, especially with my first campaign, was through a former publisher of mine. We did the campaign for Tales of Mystery Volume 1. And don't get me wrong, my first Kickstarter, I had some angels that came in and donated a substantial amount of funds in order to help make sure I got my goal and got published, because they believed in me and they believed I could do it. And they said, and they knew, if you can get this first one, you'll be okay. Which $250,000 later, that's proven to be the case. And I'll forever be grateful to those people that believed in me and my angels to kind of help get me over the hump that first time. But you under promise and you over deliver. One of the things that I realized early on is that if I'm asking people to pre-buy a book from me directly, I need to offer them something that they can't get somewhere else later. So I jumped into the notion of, any book you buy from me from Kickstarter, you'll get a Kickstarter exclusive hardcover edition of that book. That's why you can't find copies of Tales of Mystery Volume 1, or I would argue any of them, very easily in hardcover. Because we made them print to order for that campaign, and the people that have them tend not to give them up. Right. Because I'm tapping into that part of it, that I'm a fan of this, and I want this version of this thing that no one else can have. It's like we talked earlier, why do I buy CDs? And I don't buy CDs. I buy the deluxe versions with the gatefold covers and like the bonus songs and the bonus booklet. I just bought, going back to Mike Patton, Mr. Bungle, The Raging Wrath of the Easter Bunny. They did like a deluxe version of the CD in a booklet, not a booklet, a book, and it's a hardcover book, and it's got all these extra pages and stuff. Totally non-conducive to like fit in my little CD rack, things like that. So it has to go on the side. But it's a cool package. It's a cool thing. So I think that's one of the keys, that when you're doing Kickstarters, you got to offer people something that they can't get anywhere else. And you have to create a healthy sense of urgency. You have 30 days to get this cool version of this product that you will like. So let's go back to a second. I said to crowdfund, you have to have a crowd. Who is your crowd? I talk in Right or Wrong Volume 1 about not making your first book a superhero comic. And people are like, oh, well, your plot doesn't matter. I should be able to do what I want. And if I should follow my passion, I'm passionate about superheroes. Like, okay, then you better say something really cool and really unique. And I think I did that with Hope. Hope was the first superhero book that Source Point Press ever published. And let alone, not only was it the first superhero book they ever published, they published a superhero book by the horror guy.
Right.
Illustrated by the woman who does like the fantasy western thing. In Plume, which I say that lovingly. Plume's one of my favorite books. But it's like, we were very non-traditional superhero people bringing them this superhero book,
I want to talk about that strategy. I want to talk about
Yeah.
that because I think this is really, really important.
Yes.
The importance of genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially on Kickstarter, but everywhere.
Yes.
Because and we'll talk about the horror thing, and then that's where we'll start. Look, the fact that you're passionate about horror, notwithstanding, it's fantastic. That's
Mm-hmm.
really important. But the importance of genre in attracting this crowd that we're talking about, right? There are people in the world that will ingest everything horror, no matter
Yes.
what forum it comes, no matter what media it comes in,
Right.
whether it's
Right.
a comic book, a movie,
Mm-hmm.
a
Mm-hmm.
CD.
Mm-hmm.
The horror permeates the culture across media, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what genre does. That's the beauty of genre. So,
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about the success that you had as a result of that, and and what role you think it plays.
Well, yeah, it's like I said, when I was starting my career, I talk all the time about how MySpace made my career. And because I learned very quickly, comic book groups on MySpace didn't care about Nightmare World. They want to talk about Batman. They want to talk about Green Lantern. They want to talk about Spider-Man. They want to talk about the X-Men. But the horror groups, they're like, oh, wait, there's a new horror thing? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
man. Look,
go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, when I was at Double Take, for the uninitiated, I ran sales and marketing at a comic book publisher that was owned by the parent company of Rockstar Games and 2K
Mm-hmm.
Games, and we put out a series of. It's actually how Dirk and I met originally. We put out a
The
series
first time.
of
Yeah.
the first time, yeah. We put out a series of comic books that were based off of the Night of the Living Dead, the original film
Mm-hmm.
from 1966. And let me tell you something. The fans of that movie are some of the most rabid fans in the entire world. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
subculture of horror fans, but the fact of the
Mm-hmm.
matter is anything that's Night of the Living Dead, they flock to. And
Yes.
so that's how I learned this. That's how this opened my eyes. And it's fascinating to me that this exists everywhere with every genre across media. It's really, really fascinating how fandom
Right.
works in that way.
So, and that's why we were talking about how in order to crowdfund, you have to have a crowd. What is your crowd? You got to know your crowd, but to know your crowd, you got to know your work. And that goes back to doing your homework, studying your craft, learning your craft, your trade craft, you might even say.
Hey,
And hey, you're welcome. So, but knowing what you offer and then being able to articulate it, pitch it, if you will, and then being able to pitch it to the people who will be invested and interested in supporting it to make that a real thing in the world. That's how you, and then on top of that, when you talk about Kickstarter, you create that sense of urgency. Not, you have 30 days to get this thing, and this is the only time you can get this version. But then you also, as we also know in any business, you celebrate success. And again, and I'm not trying to pull back the curtain here and make it sound like this is a science, that this is a sterile thing to me, because it's not, because I'm super excited. But you know
it
what?
can be
If we get,
both. That's the
it can
beauty of
be.
this.
Yes.
That's why this show exists. That's why this podcast exists, because it can be both. You can be
Yes.
excited about it and appreciate the science.
Right. And I think one of the things I've suffered from years, and I was so excited to do this podcast with you, is because, again, I think people took for granted the fact that, oh, well, Dirk Manning just runs really successful Kickstarters. That's just Dirk. That's what he does. I'm like, no, there's a science to this. There's a lot of work that goes into this. And again, we celebrate the success, and I'm truly grateful. And here's another secret that I don't talk about usually publicly. My crowdfunding goals are a kickstart, not fully funded. Look at the Nightmare World Omnibus, that big, giant 500 plus page oversized hardcover book.
Yeah.
Okay. Spoiler, friends. My funding goal on that book was $13,000. Okay. It cost more than $13,000 to make that book. But I said $13,000 will kickstart it. That will be enough that I can then afford to put my skin in the game, and I will deliver this book unto you. Well, that